Welcome to the Deep Dive,
Emerald City Hockey's Seattle Kraken podcast.
RJ. It's the first episode of the Deep Dive podcast. It only took us, 4 months? Got a name? 4 months into the season. We've been doing this longer, even.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely, I think, needed the rebound. Emerald City Hockey podcast is a bit of a mouthful, and it's showcases, the originality, the creativity that I have in coming up with a podcast name. Glad we finally got you involved here to try and come up with a name.
Yeah, no, and I think it works, because we are the podcast that, we dive into the analytics, we deep dive into the coaching systems, we deep dive into the plays, all that stuff. The word that I see pop up so much when people talk about us is like educational, right? How many times have you seen we're like the most educational podcast?
Yeah, informative is another one I see.
Yeah. It'd be cool to be the best podcast or the funnest podcast, most personable. Love those guys, but educational, I will take. And thank you to everybody who has brought that stuff up. If you're watching the YouTube version, yes, this is a very different dog to the normal dog score. This is my sister's dog who's decided she wanted on my lap right now, and she wants to be on camera, I guess. So we are the Deep Dive podcast now. I think this is going to be really fun. I think the logo came out great. Going to have merch to go along with this, all that stuff. It's going to be a lot of fun. Unfortunately, don't get to deep dive into any Kraken games this week because it's another week of, postponements, fun stuff.
Practices, Dylan. Come on, practices.
We get practices. Yeah, perfect time
to
start.
Talking about practice.
I know. Talking about practice. Perfect time for you to then also, do all the practice videos on social media where you've already talked about practice to everybody. It's the perfect time for this one. But yes, we will start with practice because, a lot of practice been going on, and obviously coming off the last couple of games that the Kraken did play, a lot of stuff that needed to be worked on. That was very much, the tone from the team, the tone from Dave Haxtell. So RJ, what have you seen from the Kraken at practice this week, and where do you feel like they are now?
Well, this week of practice has been different than the average, week of practice going between games and all of that. It's almost been like a little mini training camp 2.0. It's just been a week to kind of focus and I guess do some deeper dives and work on some things that you wouldn't ordinarily get the chance to. And that's kind of the biggest general takeaway that I've gotten from it. A lot of the practices have been, over the hour mark, have lasted a lot longer than the other practices do. And they've gotten to work on some things system-wise that they wouldn't have had the chance to otherwise. I've noticed some different looks for zone entries. I've noticed a lot of work on special teams, particularly being aggressive on the PK. And I've noticed also, a lot more game type situations, even getting some contact, some physicality there. One of the things that Haxtell talked about and some of the players kind of echoed is the need for real compete in practice, to have that, whether it's contact or, really treating it like a game. I think it was Carson Soucy that said, it's time. We've got to practice against each other like we play against these other teams. And I think they're kind of at this point in the season where, given everything that's been going wrong, I think they can't really hold back anymore. They need to really practice full out and see if that's able to make a difference for them.
Yeah, and I mean, that's something we talked about, I guess, mid-November when I was up there. Because just going and watching their practice and then watching the Wild when they were in town, it was night and day. And, the Wild, they're all physical. They're doing puck battle drills. Like, guys are pushing, shoving. I think I saw one guy knock somebody else down. And we saw all that in like 30 seconds. And you could watch the entire Kraken practice and count on one hand the amount of times anybody got any, physical in any way with each other. And I get it. You don't want to hurt your teammate or anything. But practice, in a lot of ways, you're building that muscle memory, especially with learning a system, not having a full off-season program to implement systems, all that kind of stuff. You need that muscle memory come game time. And the only way to do that is to create game scenarios, real game scenarios, and practice through them. So I am glad that the Kraken are doing that. Did they run any sort of drill where they had somebody score and then they just tried to keep the puck out of the net for 25 seconds?
That's a good question. I didn't see any drill like that. That would have been interesting. I wonder how you kind of set that one up. You just throw another live puck in play and defend, defend, defend. Make sure you've got your guy. It's certainly something that obviously needs to be worked on, but so hard to replicate, I guess, in a practice situation. It's really just one of those things you've got to be mentally on the same page for in a game. I did see a lot of drills kind of around the net, second, third chance opportunities though, and working on preventing that. And that's something that was pointed out today by the goalies really, and Philip Grubauer, just saying that's really what he got time to work on in practice, is having a lot of these second, third chance opportunities, just one right after the other, scoring opportunities against. And Haxtell kind of echoed that as well. Can we talk about Grubauer's pads?
Yes, I know we're gonna get to those in a sec, but you brought something up,
Okay.
and I will talk about it. One, I do think that that's interesting because really we hadn't seen that been a problem for the Kraken goaltending so much this season. A lot of it was first shots going in,
Yes.
guys from high danger chances just scoring. But we did see that in those last 3 games that the goalies were making a save, and then they were just like crazy out of position for a rebound, or they were just kind of scrambling. D wasn't necessarily there to help out with rebounds. So it is interesting that they worked on that. And then I assume that also, it's got to be a drill somewhat for the offense because they have, there's nobody trying to put in rebounds on offense for this team at all.
Absolutely. I'm glad you brought that up too, because, as of today, the Kraken are last place in the NHL in 5-on-5 expected goals for per 60. That's not good. They're averaging 1.97 expected goals for per 60 at 5-on-5. That's last place in the NHL, less than Arizona.
Is this 2003, RJ? What's going on?
I know, right? It's a problem, and we can focus on the defensive problems and the goaltending, which the goaltending's certainly been an issue, but they're also not scoring, and they're not generating a whole lot of offensive chances too. So learning those habits, going to the net, getting those second, third opportunities, that's how you score goals in the NHL. That's a big part of it. So working on that should help.
Yeah. All right. So now Grubauer's pads, a little something different this week.
Yes. So for a couple days of practice this week, Thursday, and then again today, Sunday, as we're recording this, Grubauer wore his old Avalanche pads from last season during practice. First noticed it on Thursday. I'm like, that looks a lot like the Avs burgundy. And then I noticed, these aren't his Kraken pads. So he was asked about that after practice today. He said they're basically the same as his current True branded pads. I mean, they're made by the same manufacturer. So maybe, he said he'd put in an order for another pair of True pads as well. So they're fine, but maybe either his current pads are kind of worn down. He's saving them for the games. I'm just speculating at this point, or maybe he's just looking for the feel of the other ones. Maybe there's some supply chain issues as far as working on getting a second backup pair of pads. Don't really know on that. Wasn't kind of followed up with that, but he said it's nothing crazy. He loves that phrase. No, nothing crazy. So yeah, it was just interesting to see him definitely wearing those Avs pads from last season for the last couple practices.
I was gonna say, like, any chance you think he wears them in a game? I mean, is that even allowed? I don't think it's allowed.
I mean, I think. Let's see, they've been approved by the NHL under the standards and everything for last season. I don't know if he had them approved going forward for this season, or if they've already been approved, whether they're just kind of grandfathered in. I don't know how that works from a rules perspective, but if he was allowed to wear them, I don't know. Of course, the Kraken's next game, is against the Avalanche in Colorado. It would be very interesting to see him wear those pads if he were to get the start. But I don't think he will.
No, I mean, look, I get him wearing them in practice and stuff too. He almost won a Vezina trophy in those pads. He's putting together, like, basically literally the worst goaltending season anybody's ever had this year in these other pads. Why wouldn't you try them? Like, it makes all the sense in the world to pull those things out of storage and throw them on and try to rekindle some of the magic. And that's why I was wondering, maybe try playing them in a game. What's the worst that could happen?
Yeah, it can't get a whole lot worse.
Not really. But yes, that is interesting. Not something you see or hear about happening every day. That's for sure.
Yep.
So that's been good. Tell us the latest on Jaden Schwartz, because I think this news came out after we did the last one, right?
Yes, it did.
Yeah.
So Schwartz had been injured already at that point, but we hadn't gotten any updates on the injury aside from just him not being at practice and all of that. So Schwartz will have hand surgery. Unfortunately, he will be out for 4 to 6 weeks. That's the timeline that they've given. So he'll be out of the lineup for a little while. I think we identified the play where it happened. He was, I believe, tripped or hooked in the last game that he played, and he kind of fell down on his hand, and obviously something must have broken there. He was wincing coming up from it, and yeah, it just didn't look good. So he'll have hand surgery. He'll be out, and of course that's going to be a huge blow to the Kraken. He's their second leading point scorer, and coupled with Tana being out, that's two of their top 6 point scorers now out long term.
Yeah, it's a problem. Um, I mean, again, thankfully the Kraken have the depth right now. COVID seems to be less of an issue right now for them than it has been the last couple weeks, right? It doesn't seem like too many guys. It seems like more people are coming off than being added right now.
Only one guy left on COVID protocol
Yeah.
after today, and that is Alex Wenberg.
Yeah, so that's helpful at least as far as surviving the loss. But yes, it's less than ideal. Obviously, a big free agent target for this team. He was supposed to be a big part of this team. Struggled through a lot of this year, really. Even though he's been putting up points for them, at least compared to the rest of the lineup. I think there's been plenty of times where it's looked like he struggled to fit in, kind of what his role on the team is systematically, all that kind of stuff. But if the Kraken are kind of in the place where I think a lot of the fan base has been, certainly the fan base that's been communicating with us, yeah, maybe it's not the worst thing in the world. Gets to go get healthy, and maybe the team's a little worse and they lose and try to secure a lottery pick. And that's kind of something I do want to talk about real quick, is just is it bad that 33 games into the year, season's pretty much lost? I think it's a 0.7% chance of making the playoffs at this point. It's not really going to happen. Is it bad if people really just start shifting gears and start not necessarily rooting for losses, but we know plenty of people that are rooting for losses at this point? You know what I mean? Like, do you think that it's bad that so early into a first season, that expectation has completely, done a 180, and that fans are kind of getting on board with that? Do you think that's going to damage the casual fans' interest in the team, and how damning do you think that's going to be, moving forward into next season?
Well, all good questions. I think I'll kind of separate it out.
Yeah.
First, I think obviously it's quite bad that we're at this point. You never want to kind of call it on the season this early, or have it look so bleak this early. Certainly when you're an expansion team, I mean, that's when it's most important to at least kind of be alive, be in the playoff race, even if you're not, right up there, just to have some kind of hope. That really helps when you're trying to build a fan base and kind of grow the sport with the team being there in its first season. So I think that's really unfortunate that they're kind of at this point right now. As far as, given that we're here, is it bad to start rooting for losses and that sort of thing? I think that was kind of the second part of your question. I would say normally, if this was just a team in its 8th, 20th, 50th season, whatever, that I would be totally on board with that, because in the NHL, it pays to be either really good or really bad. You don't want to be right there in the middle. That's the worst place to be. And so in a season like this, you do have an incentive to lose those games. But I think in this case, it doesn't make sense for the Kraken, because as an expansion team, they're still trying to kind of establish their identity. They need to get something going here, just for one, building the fan base and all of that. And two, also just to kind of maintain the status as an attractive destination, whether it's for free agents, for any kind of talent, really. And that's a question that I was asked the other day is Seattle still going to be a top flight free agent destination after this season if they don't turn it around? And I do think they need to show something, some kind of improvement for players, that they're going to want to bring on board to want to come to Seattle. I mean, it's a great place to be, great place to live. Everything off the ice is fantastic, but at the end of the day, you have to believe that they have the potential to win, and win soon, if you're going to come as a free agent. So I think in this case, it's going to help them on a number of fronts if they can turn it around and win, even if it means losing some draft positions. So right now, I'm not there yet. If it comes down to the last week of the season and you're talking about draft position, then sure. But I don't think we're at that point yet. And then let's see the third part. Do you think this is going to hurt with casual fans and all of that? Yeah, I think it does. Winning helps a lot. We've seen that across just about every sport in every market. Winning helps a lot, and when you're not winning, it's tough, right? Casual fans will kind of look the other way, and we just that's how it works. It's nothing about Seattle, nothing about hockey, the Kraken. That's just how it works in sports. And so I think it does hurt in that respect. I guess maybe it also helps that a lot of the other Seattle sports teams aren't doing too well. Unfortunately, you never want that to be the redeeming factor. But yeah, I think it does hurt.
Yeah, it is going to be interesting over the offseason, and I think you bring up an amazing point with the free agency thing, because that is right now, realistically, in my mind, that and kind of fan interest, although that doesn't seem to be a problem yet, at least not too
That's
much.
true.
The free agency thing really is the best reason to make the argument of why they should keep pushing and why we should still be rooting for them to succeed, because that is something that is going to help them out. You look at like this team's cap friendly page, for instance, right? You got more forwards on expiring deals than you have forwards signed for next season right now. You know what I mean? Like you're going to have this situation where you're going to need to attract people, bringing them in, they need to want to come here. Yes, you're going to have a lot of cap space, but you don't want to overpay guys to offset the fact that you're considered a losing team. Although I don't know that any, team 1 year in is going to really be seen that way. I just think that with the casual fan thing, as far as not losing excitement and the excitement waning, and even to some extent, this could factor into the free agency thing. I guess I wish that the Kraken were doing a little bit more now that the team has been losing and it's in the situation where it is. Playoffs aren't really on the table anymore. I do wish that the Kraken were cranking up the fan outreach. And I understand COVID obviously makes it really hard. You can't have the players out interacting with fans. You can't have them do, projects. You can't do signings at the practice facility, all that stuff right now. I get that. But give us more videos. The few times they give us like videos of the team interacting or the team doing something like building the gingerbread houses, it's amazing. Mm-hmm. That's something you could be giving us that would be keeping the fans engaged, even the casual fans. That brings in casual fans just as much as a winning team does, in my opinion. Or at least keeps them around for, through the first season. I think it keeps fans engaged. It deepens those bonds we feel to the players that are going to be hanging around and everything. And I know I just said a bunch of these guys aren't going to be here next year, or at least on paper they won't be. But that's how you build those deeper emotional bonds. That's how you get players, or at least young kids, excited to go and buy somebody's jersey, right? Like, as adults, we can all look and go like, okay, Grubauer, he's going to be the goalie of the future. He's the franchise goalie. I can get his jersey, whatever, right? Or we'll find a reason to like somebody. But when you're looking at like the next generation of fans coming in, and yes, it's hard to sell a 7-year-old per se on a losing team. You can sell them on the experience of going to a game, although there have been issues maybe with that, just with the amount of people and demand for the games, the price of going to a game. Not super cost effective to take like a family of 4 or 5 to a game right now, just because of everything. You get them excited by having them build an ODR in Seattle, because with all the snow, and you have the players out there playing on it, and you have them goofing around and doing stuff, and you put that out on Twitter and Instagram and YouTube, right? Like plenty of teams have YouTube presences. This team doesn't really, you know what I mean? Like I'd like to see more of that fan outreach and building that connection between us and the players, because I think that's how you deal with the losing. That's kind of the direction you got to go to keep everything, all the good feels. You know what I mean?
No, I think that's a great point that you make, and there's a lot of things that you can do, as a team, even if the winning on the ice isn't there, to kind of grow the fan base and reach out to people. I think outreach is the perfect word, and kind of it's tough with COVID, I know you said,
Mm-hmm.
but there are other things you can do. I love that video of Yanni Gord they put out the other day, mic'd
Mm-hmm.
up at practice, things like that. And Gord's a guy certainly who will be sticking around,
Yeah.
kind of get to know their personality. There's a lot of great personality on the team. You can kind of showcase that. So I think
Yeah.
that's a good point. And it's tough. Another thing is it's tough with the, knowing how much the losing affects the fan outreach, because it's a case of really, the fans that are there are going to be there, but you can't see the fans that maybe would have, recognized the Kraken and gotten into hockey had they been winning a little bit more. If the Kraken were, in a firm playoff spot or whatever, and Seahawks fan just, oh man, this team
Mm-hmm.
sucks right now. Mariners didn't make the playoffs. It was close. Hey, have you heard about the Kraken? Your buddy just, if you heard about the Kraken, they're doing really well. You should go check them out. Watch a game. Yeah, I mean, if you even can on TV,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
that's the other part that's been tough to watch the games as well. And we've gone into that in the past, but
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so that's another thing.
Yeah,
I'll start
and
to ramble now.
no, 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 it's fine. And yeah, I mean, get the Kraken players to do local news spots and stuff. Again,
Mm.
invite the local morning news in and around, and invite those kinds of things. Like you just gotta get a little creative as far as the PR outreach, and I think you can offset a lot of the losses, especially because it's understandable as an expansion team. You can get away with it now, but you have to do this other stuff to offset it. You can't just be like, well, everybody's gonna be okay because they know we're an expansion team. Yes, they're maybe not here right now, but they'll be here when we're good in a year or so. I think you have to offset it now while you can, and take advantage of the fact that yes, a lot more losses than anybody saw coming, but expansion team, we can use that excuse, so to speak, move out, do this other stuff, build those connections. It's at least what I want to see the Kraken really focusing on now, is doing stuff like that within the community, just because yeah, we could go on a winning streak, probably not going to matter for a playoff spot, and it'll just kind of end up hurting the offseason plans at this point. So um, that's at least where I'm at when it comes to all of this stuff. All right, so it sort of dovetails into, I think, what our next topic's going to be, which is Ron Francis and Ron Francis interview. Um, I read the great interview done by Greg Wyshynski of ESPN. I strongly suggest everybody go and read the article that Wyshynski put out. Read the interview that he put out. We'll touch on plenty of stuff from it here, but definitely want to give him a shout out. I've been following his writing for decade plus at this point through many different outlets that he's been at. Absolutely love him. He's a great writer. I strongly suggest all hockey fans go and familiarize themselves with him and all of his work. But a lot of stuff touched on in this interview, RJ, with Ron Francis. I'm trying to think of really where we should start. I guess we can kind of build off of what we were just talking about, and that's, talking about where the team is at right now. Season hasn't been going as well as expected, and how, Ron Francis very much has been kind of sticking to the same message he kind of had in the offseason, which is, we're not Vegas. We weren't expecting to be Vegas. Nobody can expect us to be Vegas. And, we've got a good 5-year plan, and we're sticking to that plan.
Yeah, Francis kind of has kept that consistent message over this whole time where, yes, we're not Vegas. We have a long-term plan. We're going to do it differently. And I understand that you don't want to set the expectations too high to Vegas level. And certainly given the team's start, you don't want to go tracking back toward those level of expectations. But, I'm kind of tired of Vegas being used as a way to deflect from some legitimate criticisms about this team. And you kind of saw it throughout that interview where legitimate criticism after legitimate criticism are brought up. And it's like, well, we're not Vegas. Those deals weren't available, things like that. Or we had Vegas on the outside of the expansion draft, so we couldn't do this and that, where I just don't think it applies there every time. And I just think also the Kraken are so far kind of below even what their expectations for themselves were at the start of the season that it can't be used entirely. I mean, you can't be like, oh, Kraken are 0-82. Well, you're not Vegas. You can't expect us to be Vegas. I think there's a limit to it. So that is kind of one thing that I noticed as far as, the expectations and that kind of tone that he took that just bothered me a little bit.
No, and I think that's totally legitimate, and I think that's probably how a lot of fans reading this would feel, because it is. I understand the saying, like, look, because of the Vegas thing, a lot of GMs out there learned lessons. Some of the deals weren't available to us. That was clear at the expansion draft. We've still talked about them maybe not taking the most advantage of what they could have done at the expansion draft. And Ron Francis does tend to just use that Vegas excuse whenever that gets brought up. But yeah, I mean, this started literally the day of the expansion draft. Like watching the special on ESPN, like that was clear where he was at. He seemed, at the time, I thought it was just that he was tired, but I do legitimately think that he was disappointed in kind of how the process went and how the situation went. Maybe it was just that he was upset about all the leaks, all the leaks earlier that day, how all the picks were leaked and everything. But like, I also don't think he cares that much about the, TV special maybe not being as exciting as it could have been otherwise. I really don't think that was Ron Francis's concern at the time. I do think that he was thinking, all along before the expansion draft, they're saying, okay, we've got this long-term plan. We're going to build a core, and then, all this other stuff is going to go around that core. And I do think he was thinking, all right, I'm going to walk away from this with, at least an additional first-round pick. I'm going to have a couple second-round picks. Like, I think he was just truly going in, and the more he was having problems making deals as the expansion draft was getting closer, he was probably thinking like, okay, well, we're going to get there and they're going to cave. You know what I mean? Like it's just like the trade deadline where it's like, no, I'm not doing that deal. I'm not doing that deal. I'm not doing that. Hour to go till the deadline. Okay, here's everything you want for Paul Gostad. Right? Like that's just the way it goes. And I think he really was going into that expansion draft thinking, okay, at the last minute, a lot of stuff's going to come together that I've been kicking the tires on or discussions that I've been having with guys. We're going to get to this deadline and they're going to fold, and then we're going to be able to do this. And I think, looking at his attitude then and kind of the attitude he's kept now and the reasoning, why he keeps bringing that up, I think is because it really bothers him personally that he really thought that was going to happen and he was wrong. And it bothers all of us when, something goes wrong. Certainly if you're a public figure or something, that's even worse. And, that is me speculating. I don't know that that's the case or anything. I'm not like trying to put that out there completely. But I do think that comes up a lot. And yes, at some point you got to get rid of the Vegas thing. You and I were saying all along, don't have Vegas expectations.
Yes.
But playoff expectations were not out of the realm of possibility. All the projection models, all the advanced stat stuff was like, should be a playoff team, or at least up there. Even the worst, most down on this team guys before the season started, and Wyshynski brings this up, thought that this team was going to be way better than it is right now.
Yes.
No one thought they would be a bottom 5 team, and really not just like, oh, bad luck has put them there or key injuries have put them there. They just look like a bottom 5 team right now. Playing the game of hockey, they look it. And that it still doesn't make sense. I'm looking at the roster. Just on paper, it doesn't make sense with how they've performed. And Francis did nothing to really address that. And that is disappointing.
Yeah, I think there were certain areas where, I understand it. It's really tough in an interview. You don't want to necessarily hold the guy's feet to the fire. You're just trying to get some explanation of what's going on. But yeah, there were certainly things that, maybe could have been addressed as far as the expansion draft process. And I know that's something that Francis is not ever going to probably want to get really into, because I think even all of us thought on the day of the expansion draft, oh, they could have done a lot better with this. Mm-hmm. It's not some kind of hindsight thing given the losing. People are like, wait, there's no side. What were you doing? Right. they didn't do the process correctly. It felt like at the time. So yeah, I think, we probably will never get full answers on that because it's impossible to know. It's all speculation. Were the deals there and then they just didn't come up? Did he not lower the prices? What happened? It's impossible to know. And I don't think we're ever going to get real answers, but yeah, I don't know. That's kind of where we're at with that.
Yes. So gosh, there's a lot to talk about here. I guess one of the other things he talks about, well, I guess we'll stay in that general area and talk about the idea of building up a core and that being their focus, and them still, having this longer term approach to everything. It's that, again, as you were saying, just as much as the kind of Vegas excuses have been consistent, this has at least been consistent. And I do think that that's important, that the plan has stayed consistently. Obviously, if the plan was to build through the draft and stuff, then yes, being bad probably plays into that. I still don't think this was all going to plan. But it at least helps. It's not quite the Vegas scenario where they were like, yeah, we got a 5-year plan, and then it was like, oh wow, we're like really, really good. Let's scrap that plan and try to take advantage of this.
Right.
Although it worked for them.
Yeah.
So he's sticking to the 5-year plan. I get that. I think that's, you and I have talked several times, whether it be here and certainly for the last, decade plus, about the best ways to build a hockey team and how really you need those kind of superstar guys that you draft. You have team control over for a while. You can kind of cost control them a little bit. It's not a great system, but that's the realities of it. And then you build around them with pieces like free agency. I understand that that's the best way of doing it. I understand that that's what this team wants to do. I struggle to connect the dots with then some of the other decisions made that Francis made. And I think Wyshynski was trying to get there with some of it, and Francis wasn't quite answering the questions. But
Right.
like, why do you sign a 30-year-old goaltender to a 5-year deal if you have a 5-year plan? Your plan is that in that last year of the deal, Philip Grubauer at 35 is going to come through for Matty Beniers in the gang. Like, you know what I mean? Like, why do you go out and sign Jaden Schwartz at 29? Wenberg. I get that you need some pieces there for this year so you can be competitive, help build the fan base, all the stuff we just talked about in the last segment. I get all that. But also, like, majority of this team is between 25 and 30. If this team, if 3 years from now is really when the Kraken's window is here, how much of this team is still going to be there? And how much of this team that is here now are you have just going to lose over time to things like free agency, where you're not going to be getting any return back from them? Like,
Yeah, and how many of those contracts will look good potentially now because they're in those, prime years, and then look bad when you're trying to compete?
right.
You look at the Schwartz contract, this longer term, Grubauer's contract. Those are meant for now. Those are now contracts that you kind of pay for later.
Right. Like, this is a team built of supporting cast guys, like the best supporting cast guys. Don't get me wrong. These guys are really good, but without the superstar we're seeing, without the engine that kind of can make all of this stuff go in the NHL, it's just kind of here. So then, yes, again, you come around to the Tarasenko's potentially having been available and the decision not to go in that direction because you're committed to this long-term thing. But yes, if you're going to hold on to Alexander Wenberg until he's, 31, what kind of return are you going to get back from him? He's not going to help your future core, and you're not going to get a good return back from him. Like, I think that's a legitimate question to ask. And I understand Ron Francis isn't going to try to give away all of his plans or anything. But again, I want an answer.
Right. And this is one that I know no one's going to press him on, but like, how about not picking Nikita Zadorov, who you could have flipped for a 3rd round pick the next day?
Right.
And that's consistent with having the 5-year plan and drafting and developing. It's a free draft pick.
Yeah.
It's certain things like that of just not using the process correctly, where there's no way to defend that move because you got nothing instead.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And there was just several teams we just ended up with nothing from.
Yeah, and I get that. Like there are picks, by the way, I'm not confused by that. I know there are picks that you need to let go. Vegas did that. When there's really nothing of value there. But when there's a guy who gets flipped for a 3rd round pick the very next day, then taking nothing looks pretty bad.
Right. It makes you look unplugged. And maybe it's because you were so dialed into everything else that you missed that. Right. Like, and I don't mean like miss the idea of, I could take this guy and flip him, but, miss that there was already this market out there for him. I could see that being a reasonable reason why it didn't happen. But yes, it's just one of those things where it was just like, I don't know. The expansion draft. Yeah. Like I said, going back and thinking about Ron Francis, his demeanor, the things he was saying, just the vibe he was giving off on expansion day. It seemed like he was just tired, and maybe he's just not like a TV media guy, and that's why he was the way he was. But now it's starting to look like, yeah, he was just disappointed.
Yeah, it certainly would make sense looking back at it.
Yeah, and maybe that's not the best way to kick off the franchise is to be disappointed with it. The other thing is, he brings up COVID, which I do think is legitimate. Obviously, lots of teams have been dealing with COVID. Kraken have kind of dealt with it over a longer period of time, maybe, than some other teams, and certainly in a less consistent manner. It's not like it just ran through the team all at once. It's just kind of been hanging around, taking guys in
Yeah.
and out of the lineup all over the place. So I understand when he says stuff like that. He brings up, this was a team that was supposed to be, and this is Francis. Like you looked at our team, everybody thought we were going to be a good goaltending team. We were going to kind of, net out this thing, which certainly we did. I think everybody agrees on that, and that hasn't been the case. And so, Shinsky asks him about Grubauer, about Drieger, how this has all been going on. Francis really commits to Grubauer. Like, you walk away from this thinking Grubauer is going to be this franchise goalie for the next little while.
For sure. And I don't think we should be too surprised by that. I mean, once you've given him that contract, you've committed to him. Whatever happens, you can say whatever you'd like after that, but he's the goalie for a while. And he points out some points that we've looked at before earlier in this season, that Grubauer struggled also when arriving in Colorado. That was there, and that if you look at over his whole career, he's not this bad of a goalie. I think we all know this is not what he is long term.
Because no goalie has ever been this bad of a goalie.
Yes, and stayed in the league.
Yeah.
So I'm comfortable with that too. I think Grubauer eventually will bounce back. Maybe it won't be this season, but I think eventually he's going to get closer to where he was. I don't think this is what he is now. I don't think anyone really thinks that. So I understand Francis's answer on that.
Yeah, again, it doesn't jive with the whole 5-year plan thing. That's where I'm struggling with it. I guess, other than, yes, you want to just always kind of have the best goalie you can around. And certainly for the years 1, 2, 3 of having those young guys in the lineup, you'd like to have a veteran, stable goalie so that they, it's not like you're also dealing with a developing goalie who's going to let in a bunch of goals and maybe kill the confidence of all the young skaters you have out there or something. I understand all that. It was just an answer that I don't know a ton of fans are going to walk away feeling great from. So that's why I wanted to bring it up for us to discuss. Anything else really stick out from this article that you want to touch on?
Yes. I guess the first thing that I was kind of looking for when I first, scanned the interview and everything is, okay, how far is he willing to go as far as kind of admitting that this season they're probably not going to make the playoffs? They're looking toward the future. Is he still kind of holding out hope for this season? Because I know that's something that the two of us had talked about is, because we're talking about the Kraken every day, is like, how long before we can really talk about, yes, it's unlikely that they're going to make the playoffs, but there's always that hesitation. We don't want to be like, oh, they're not going to make it. They're not, just because they always could turn it around, right? Technically, there's still a number of games left. And so I was curious to see what his tone was about that. And it was very much, this season's done. We don't have a chance. We're moving on to next season. This is long term. So I think he's kind of at that point now with where they're at this season, and he's at peace with that. He's accepted that. Makes me feel a little better about kind of accepting that, like I think we did maybe last week or a couple weeks ago. After some of those, like the Edmonton and the Philly games, we were just like, all right, guys, this is where we are. So that was one takeaway I had, just kind of from his tone overall, and talking about even being sellers at the deadline. He didn't shy away from that.
No, but he also kind of did. Like when Wyshynski kind of brought that up more specifically, like, okay, like what's the plan for the deadline? Like you couldn't get the stuff that you wanted to do at the expansion draft, but we see it every year. He says it kind of fun, like, yes, the GMs learned from the Vegas expansion. You couldn't get stuff there, but we see it every year that GMs never learn at the expansion deadline. That's where you can take advantage of those mistakes. And again, I get it. That's a future event, so you're not going to expect a GM to be like, oh yeah, no, we're looking to move Giordano. We're looking at whatever. Love to get this kind of return from him. Obviously, Francis is not going to say that.
Yeah.
But he still just took like the most blasé, like,
For sure. He managed to say absolutely nothing at all. I almost want to read it verbatim just because it's so impressive how little he says.
He basically said, like,
we're no different than any other team.
Yeah.
You see what's out there, who's looking for what. If you have something that makes sense, you do it. If you don't, you don't. Like
what is that?
I mean, that might be like Ron Francis is a very talented guy in so many ways.
Yeah.
That might be one of his best talents, though, is saying absolutely nothing while saying very many words.
I think it's a combination of being in a management position and just being in hockey in general. That's what
Yep.
that gives you. Many decades of those two things. You end up like that. Yeah. So that was the one thing that was just kind of like I was like, okay, I want a little bit more because that's really what's going on. You've acknowledged that that's what's going on now. So I would have liked to get an insight into maybe what he was thinking for the next month or so as we get into the trade deadline. But in a lot of ways, it also benefited you and me, RJ, because we get to now do that on the
Yes.
podcast. So maybe Francis was just looking out for us because
Yeah.
he listens and he's a fan. Hey, Ron. Um, so RJ, as I said
Yeah.
earlier, lots of guys on expiring deals on this team.
Oh, yes.
Those are the prime trade deadline targets because you don't got to worry about paying them for a long time. They're the rentals. You can bring them in, all that good stuff. So let's go through all the guys on expiring deals, kind of talk about who we think's going to stay, who we think's going to go, if we think they're going to be traded, and if we think they're on the trade block, where they might go. Because that's one of the things we've missed when we've talked about, the last couple times we brought up the trade stuff as people have asked us about it. We've talked about who we think could get traded, but we haven't really talked about trade partners yet. And I think that's where
Right.
things can get a little interesting for us here. So let's just go ahead and burn through the RFAs first, because realistically, I think a lot of these are just going to stay with the Kraken. I don't think
Agreed.
you're going to move any. Sorry, don't think McCann's leaving. Don't want McCann leaving. I think we're all in
Nope.
agreement there. Ryan Donato, we've talked about several times, having an amazing season. Want to see him stay around. So I don't see them trading Ryan Donato at the deadline either.
No.
Morgan Geeky, ditto is the first two. Then we move into defense. There's Mason Appleton, I guess.
Yeah. Appleton's there. That could be an interesting one. He was talked about as potential guy on the trade block earlier this season. I think we both agree he's kind of put it together a little bit since. One of the reasons he was talked about as a trade option was because he hadn't been playing well. It looked like maybe a poor fit. But given how much forward depth they have on this team, I mean, do you not listen to offers?
No, I think you got to listen to offers, and I think teams would be willing to make offers for him too. I mean, I got to think a lot of teams would be interested in Mason Appleton for this year. I saw an article earlier about the Penguins and why they should be interested in Mason Appleton. Find themselves in a playoff position unexpectedly. I think there's some other teams. Tell me he wouldn't fit in well in Nashville.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. He'd be a great fit in Nashville.
He'd be a great fit there. St. Louis, he'd be a good fit. If a team like Colorado is looking to add depth, I think he'd fit in with their style of play really well. So I think you can have a really good market for Mason Appleton, and I think the Kraken should explore it and trade him if you get a good offer for him, because long term, all right, he's going to be 26 next year, and you're going to have to pay him probably not a ton, but again, you're going to quickly get into the UFA years from here on out, and I just don't know that he's going to be an effective piece once your core finally, comes together and is in the time to need him.
Exactly. This is kind of, where his prime is and where he's most useful. And he might be one of those guys that makes sense to move, not because he's the guy who's, stands out as being out of the lineup, not good enough, but just because the return you could get is so good.
Yeah, exactly. Don't know that you could get a first for him. Maybe if you got a big bidding war going for him, but still, second round pick would be really nice, or a second and a fourth or something isn't unrealistic.
Or if there's a mid-tier prospect you like.
That too. Yeah. Alex True. I liked Alex True in his time up here. I think you could probably re-sign him. There's not going to be a trade market for him.
No. I think it's just choose, do you want to re-sign him or not? I wouldn't have a problem with it, and he's good to have, down in the AHL. I don't know. I haven't been as impressed at the NHL level. It's just frustrating to see someone with that kind of size who doesn't use it, just consistently does not use it, and doesn't really have that physicality to his game. Tries to play like a 5'10" skilled forward, and but really could do a lot more, I think, with his size. And he's not really scoring like that, like the skilled forward kind of he tries to play like. So I don't know. It's what I saw with him with the Sharks and Barracuda too. I think that's just kind of who he is, where his game's at, and I just don't know that it's good enough to crack an NHL roster.
Yeah, I liked his off puck play a little bit. But yes, I totally understand. And everybody else is, forward wise, if they're not on this team, then there's probably no trade market for them. Guys like Coland and stuff, like I like him, but there's no market, and I don't think you'd re-sign him either.
Right.
All right. So looking at defense, two names: Jeremy Lauzon, Hayden Fleury.
Those are some big question marks there.
They really are.
Yeah, certainly. Given how they've played this season, I think a lot of it will be determined by how the rest of the season goes.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly, maybe after the trade deadline, if Giordano goes, not to get ahead of ourselves, but to get more playing time for those two, really see what they are, what they can bring to this team. I like both of them. I'd lean toward bringing them both back if you could, but realistically, I don't know if they're going to have the defense spots for it.
That's the big thing. Obviously, right now it's still insane that they essentially have 8 defensemen.
Yes.
I have no idea how they've managed to do this, why they continue to do it. But I think at this point it does seem like a foregone conclusion Giordano is being traded. So working off that, I don't know. Like, it's one of those things. We saw Hayden Fleury as part of a pretty big trade package just this last trade deadline. Like,
yeah,
if he seems to be falling out of favor lineup wise, at least the
it's
last
true.
little bit. So I could see maybe you make a move there. Like, if you're not going to play him, you're not sure you're going to bring him back. You don't feel like he's a good fit with this team. He has value.
Yeah, no, I do
could
think
see
there's a team
there.
that would want to bring him in. Also, the contract. I know you're not really looking at nickel and dime in the cap here. You've got plenty of cap room, but you look at his contract. He's at 1.3 mil right now. So that qualifying offer as an RFA is going to be higher, certainly than Lauzon, who's just at 850K. So that could be another factor as well.
Right, and I think Lauzon has made good strides with the Kraken so far this year. Obviously started off terrible. It was terrible.
Yes.
But he's gotten really, really good for them. And I think that, he's getting comfortable in this system. I don't know that if I was another team, I'd look and go like, okay, well, he changed teams, changed cities, changed systems, and it took him like 4 months to get going. Nobody's going to be looking at trading for Jeremy Lauzon after that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I don't think so.
So real quick, Hayden Fleury, I got to think a trade market for Hayden Fleury would basically include every team in the league.
Yeah, I think there are so many teams that are looking for that kind of defensive depth. I mean, one is a contender. I mean, because you could always use more blue line depth through a playoff run. I mean, your defensemen just get worn down over these playoff series. You need guys like that, and he's still young enough. He's only 25, where you could have teams that are maybe looking to contend in the next couple of years that think he could be a fit there.
Right. I was thinking an up and coming team might go, okay, he's an established guy. We know what he is. We could part with, a decent return for the Kraken because we know we can plug and play and he's going to be better than anybody we're going to find, and or the timetable's not going to line up with, let's say, a high second round pick.
Right.
Like, that guy's going to take a couple years. You could just get Hayden Fleury now and then know that, you have him to compete. I could see LA being interested in him.
Oh yeah, LA is a good option there. He kind of fits with their window and what they're looking at. They could use a little more help on the blue line. Yeah, that's a good fit.
Yeah, they're the team that really stood out to me the most when I was kind of looking around here at potential trade partners. So that is it for the RFAs. So RJ, UFA time, fun
Yes.
stuff. Let's go ahead and we'll just start and get Giordano out of the way. Only defenseman, upcoming UFA. Like I said, I would be more surprised if they kept him than if they didn't trade him at this point. What are we looking at return rise? I got to think a first. A first for a rental, it's going to be a low first.
Right. That's the return you're shooting for. That's certainly what you're asking for if you're Ron Francis. Kind of seeing how he's handled trades in the past, I don't know that he'll be able to get it. So I'm thinking either a first or a second plus, maybe, a second and a third, or a second and a fourth.
Second and a prospect.
Second and a prospect, something like that. Which I think I'd say it's probably more likely. We'll see. I would hope that Francis could get a first, but we'll see what's out there. Also, just given that there's some other defensemen on the market this year that might move. We'll have to, that it all depends too,
Yeah.
who's willing to get traded, all of that stuff. So that's probably what I'm thinking as far as a return.
I think you can get a first if you're Ron Francis if you make it part of a 3-team deal. If you
To reduce his cap hit twice?
To reduce his cap hit twice, I think you can get a first, especially if you as Seattle, not only are you retaining the first half of this, which is the most expensive, but then you're also willing to maybe take on another team's bad contract just for the rest of the year because you've got the cap space. I think that's how you can get a first for Giordano. I mean, I agree. If I'm another team, I'm not looking at Giordano this year and being like, yeah, I want to give up a first for that guy. But I think that's how I would play it if I was Ron Francis. I'd find a third party team and do something where it's like, okay, I'll retain half of Giordano, I'll take on your bad contract and a second, and then you give me a first in that, and then you'll get a second back from the team you give Giordano to, or something like that, right? To make it all happen. I could see something like that being the case. That's at least, like I said, what I would do. As far as teams being interested in him,
I mean, we got to address the elephant in the room here.
Yes, Calgary. I mean,
yeah,
they are playing very, very well right now. Obviously, he knows the team. That wouldn't be an issue. I just don't know. I mean, what?
It's hard to make a deal work there with Calgary. I mean, yes, they've got their first rounder. I don't know that they really want to move that right now certainly for a rental like Giordano. I certainly wouldn't if I was them. They do have 2 second-round picks though.
Yes. So that could help out. I'm looking around, like, what do you think of, the Rangers? He wouldn't be a top pairing. He wouldn't be a top pairing guy for you if you're the Rangers, but he would add some depth and add some veteran presence there for you.
Yeah, I think they could use him given kind of where their blue line's at. I mean, they have a lot of younger defensemen. That they could probably use someone older like that. I think their oldest defenseman is 29.
Yeah,
as I'm seeing. So I think they could use kind of a veteran leader in that group. And he kind of fits, with just generally, how they play. They value the veteran leadership. They value that sort of thing. So that could be good. And they have a number of prospects that they could move.
Yeah.
They also have 2 second-round picks.
Mm-hmm.
I like that as potential target.
Yeah. So they're a team that I would look at in addition to Calgary, because yes, I think Calgary makes a lot of sense for him. All right. Forwards. So two of the guys we talked about a lot as far as, they're struggling to fit in, not sure where they're going to fit in, all that stuff. We think they're the 2 obvious guys to move and get something back for them and not have to re-sign come the end of the year. And that was, of course, Calle Jarnkrok and Colin Blackwell. And boy, how things have changed in the last 2-3 weeks.
For sure. I mean, it's amazing what being on either end of Yanni Gourde will do for you.
Yeah. So I guess let's start with Jarnkrok. Gosh, he's finally being the player that we wanted him to be all along. But that being said, he's going to be more expensive to re-sign. And he's 30 right now. So again, you're looking long term. How are you going to use Calle Jarnkrok as far as he's not going to be effective for your window? I don't know. I think he's
so much forward depth. I mean, that's what you've got the most of. Even for a guy who can play center, which is really valuable, in a pinch. You got Beniers coming up. We talked about the center depth for next year. As tough as it is, I just don't see the fit. And that's provided that Jarnkrok wants to stay. I mean, I have nothing to suggest that he wouldn't, but just given that he, hasn't been the best fit until very recently, I don't know. He's got 31 other teams that he could potentially go to. Maybe one of them feels like a better fit to him.
Yeah, this feels like one of those situations where if you want to keep him, you'd have to overpay market value probably. And again, I don't know that makes sense for the Kraken to do. I think he's if I'm Ron Francis and I can only keep one, he's probably the one I'm letting walk. And that's hard for me to say because I absolutely love him and I've loved him for years. But I just think looking at the team, looking at kind of where everybody's at, what the plan is, I think Yarncroke makes the most sense. And again, Yarncroke, maybe now that he's getting a little better, the way he was been trending though, I don't know what kind of market he would have for a trade.
Right. I don't think you'd get as much for him as, say the Preds or even the Kraken would have gotten for him this summer had they wanted to flip him or trade him ahead of the expansion draft. I think you're probably looking at, a mid-round pick, maybe a third for him, if you can get that. It's tough. Maybe the problem is the Kraken aren't in the best negotiating position either,
No.
because if you don't make a deal, you just hang on and he might just leave in free agency. So it's one of those where you kind of have to take what you can get, or, as some GMs will do. We've heard Brian Burke say this, just don't take the deal so the guys know you'll stick to your prices.
Yeah.
Although we saw how well that may have worked out during the expansion draft.
Yeah, we've seen how well it's worked out for Brian Burke a couple times too.
Yeah.
All right, so let's say they do decide to move Yarncroke. Teams that could be interested in him, I think Nashville, just because of the situation they're in, that makes the most sense probably.
Yep.
St. Louis, I think he would fit in very well there. To some extent, I think he'd do well in Vegas.
Yeah, I think he would. I mean, he kind of fits similar to Matthias Janmark, who they brought in last season at the trade deadline. I don't know if they, realistically have the space to do that. Maybe Seattle can help them out cap-wise with something and moving someone out, because they're going to have to do that with Eichel returning.
Yeah.
So it's going to be this, huge thing of cap juggling, and maybe you could take on a contract that they're trying to get rid of.
That'd be a way of upping the price for Yarncroke, like the return.
It's true. I mean, take like I don't know how much, Vegas wants to hang on to a Will Carrier, but that's got some term on it actually. So I don't know if you'd want to do that. But let's see. I don't know if they need to move out. Yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. Otherwise, I mean, both Florida teams, I think, would be options for him, and I think Pittsburgh would be interested in him, just to add some depth, and as we talked about on the Patreon podcast, they only ever need one center healthy, at least until playoff time. But until playoff time, you might want to have two guys around who can play that position.
It's a luxury.
It is a luxury. All right, Colin Blackwell. I'm in favor of re-signing Colin Blackwell. Personally.
Agreed. And he had such a rough start to the season through no fault of his own, missing all of training camp with the injury and then being on, in COVID protocol. And he's really found his game, over these last few weeks. And I've been happy with everything I've seen from him. He's such a versatile player. And yeah, the role kind of overlaps a bit with Yarncroke. And if you can only keep one, I'd keep Blackwell. He's going to be cheaper. He's younger. And I just like the way he fits better and the versatility within the lineup. We still haven't seen him on the power play, but I know he can do that too.
Exactly. That's I just think of some of the plays I would see him make as a Ranger, and I just go, there is room for that on this team somewhere. And we haven't seen it yet, but I know it's there, and I think it would benefit this team. And yeah, I don't think his price tag, certainly after everything that's happened this year, is going to be very high.
Late round pick you're looking at, and I don't think it's worth giving up on him.
I meant re-signing him. Yeah.
Price tag. Yeah,
return wise,
no, it's the price tag's probably not going to be too high. I mean, you're probably, I probably know more than $1 million.
Yeah, 1.5 tops, 1.5 tops probably. All right, Marcus Johansson. I've loved. It is the toughest one because I've loved what he's done with the Kraken. I think he's been very good on and off the ice for this team, it seems like. But he's the oldest. It's 31. What do you do with that?
It's tough because he's been one of just a few guys who have provided the type of offensive creativity that he has this season. And it's something that they've just sorely needed, given that they don't have any, real legit scoring wingers outside of Jordan Eberle to bring creativity. So I think it's got to depend on what the plan is for next offseason. I mean, if you're looking at, or for this offseason, I mean, if you're looking at bringing in, say a big name free agent like a Johnny Gaudreau or a Philip Forsberg, if that's kind of what you're aiming at, we're going to bring in some scoring wingers. We're going to replace that offensive creativity. We're going to build on that. Then maybe he's not necessary.
Hmm.
But if you're not looking at doing that, he might be worth bringing back.
Right. And I think based on what's happening right now, I don't know that the Kraken are looking at doing that. And
Right.
I have this vision, Marcus
Okay.
Johansson being on a young Matty Beniers wing, and I think that that would be incredible. I think the early returns on that would be very big, and I think Johansson's the perfect guy to pair with a young player like Beniers as far as how creative he is. He can read what the young guys, likes to do, what his tendency are, how best to play around that, and build up confidence in a young player. I think I'd keep him around for that reason.
Yeah, I mean that's a good point. And also I don't know that the trade return would be very high
Yeah.
either. Because it's one of those where he's played this specific role in Seattle that I don't know that there are a whole bunch of teams that necessarily need what he brings or that are
Hmm.
that are lacking that. So yeah, I think it's probably best to hang on to him, and I think you could sign him to an affordable deal too.
Agreed. I mean, he was a free agent signing this year, and he was pretty affordable. So, obviously, that's okay. And not only that, he was a late signing, which I guess tells
Hmm.
you there wasn't a big market for him without having to give up a draft pick or anything. So, obviously, the market for him now is probably not super huge. Riley Shahan, there's no market there. That being said, I think he's a good guy to end on because we can kind of segue into our last little discussion here briefly. But I've liked what Riley Shahan's done when he's been on the team with them and everything. I think if you need to round out your bottom six over the offseason, I think he's would be a great guy to come back.
For sure. I like everything he's done. He's been so solid defensively. He knows his very specific role and he plays it well.
Hmm. But so that finishes up this as far as discussing all the guys on expiring deals and kind of where we think the Kraken should go with that as far as either re-signing them, trading them, who might be interested, potential returns. But I just brought up something to talk about when it comes to O'Reilly Shahan, and that's some number crunching that you did, and I think we'll probably go more into depth, later with a lot of this stuff on a later episode as far as really digging into numbers and stuff. But I do think that it's worth bringing up now.
Yeah, I mean, I just did some basics on this, and I want to give credit to Robert, on Twitter, who talked to me today. Also, Four Horsemen on our post game, and he was asking what the Kraken's record with and without Giordano in the lineup was.
Hmm.
And so I went and I ran the numbers, and while I was at it, I went and looked at some other players too, and I found some interesting things. So uh, maybe he had a point there in highlighting Giordano as a guy that without in the lineup, because Giordano, from all the players that I ran, was the only Kraken player where the team had a winning record with him out of the lineup.
Yeah.
So they were 3-2-1 without him in the lineup, 7-17-3 with. Now, a lot of these records are going to be skewed toward the losing side on both
Yeah.
ends, just given what the team's record is. So,
Yeah.
we'll throw that out there. But I was kind of comparing the team's points percentage, with and without certain players in the lineup.
Yeah. And so obviously Giordano the only one where things were not things were better when he's not there.
Mhm.
I think we can remember that was part of that like brief winning streak they had between these two big losing streaks.
Well, he was stuck in
He
Florida.
was Yes, he was stuck in Florida with COVID. That's kind of what happened there, and still, it's not like that's a fabulous record by any stretch.
No, it's just okay.
Yeah, it's at least over 500. That's the big
Mhm.
thing. But what about just a couple other names? Why don't you throw those out there?
Yeah, so a couple other names. I'll go with a tie for the guys who had, I guess, the biggest positive boost from being in the lineup. So this is a good indicator, points percentage in the lineup that's higher compared to being out of the lineup. And on defense, there's one defenseman, one forward. On defense, it's Vince Dunn. The team is 10-16-2 with him in the lineup, and then 0-3-2 without him. So they've played 5 games without Vince Dunn. They have not won a single one. So that is good for a 3.392 points percentage with him and 0.2 without him. And then also with identical numbers, but a different record, is Jared McCann at forward. So the Kraken are 9-15-4 with him and 1-4-0 without him. So those have kind of been the two guys whose presence in the lineup has provided the biggest boost.
Yeah, it's obviously, yeah, it's still brutal just hearing those numbers.
I know, right? Both of them under 500.
Yeah, they're not great either way. The McCann one, completely unsurprising. Like, it makes a ton of sense given the way McCann's played this year, how good he's looked, how, all the stuff he's done for this team, the timely goals, all that stuff. The Vince Dunn one was a little surprising to me because, I think of a lot of the games, certainly earlier on in the year, he had some brutal, aggressive pinches that just created so many, odd man rushes, breakaways that the goalies were letting in. So it is a little surprising that Vince Dunn is up there.
Yeah, no, I mean, but I think it's really hurt not having in the lineup. Just what it does to the other D pairs as well. The Dunn-Larson pair was doing well, and I think that hurts. So, this is not a one we went over before the podcast, but care to guess the guy who has the best winning percentage, points percentage while in the lineup for the Kraken? And it's at 4.447, so still under 500. But
is it Joey Decourt?
Okay, I think I put like an 8-game minimum or whatever it was, just of the regulars.
I mean, Adam Larson's been through everything. It's not going to be him.
Yeah, he's played all the games.
Yeah,
so that's not.
Is it Will Borgen?
No, it's not. Actually, Borgen, they've done better with him out of the lineup than in. That was a surprise for me.
Yeah, I mean, Riley Sheahan, Colin Blackwell, one of those guys, like a depth guy.
No, actually, well, let's talk about Sheahan because he had the second biggest boost from being in the lineup. We talked about liking what he does, and yeah, they've done significantly better, about 0.1 points percentage better with him in the lineup than without. And it's not Blackwell either.
Oh no, I don't know.
He's someone we talked about with an expiring contract. That doesn't really narrow it down.
Those were just two guys. Yarn Croak?
Nope.
Fleury?
No, although Fleury has the second best.
Ah, gosh.
They're 6-9-2 with him in the lineup.
Johansson? Oh, no, it's got to be Ryan Donato.
No, it's actually not.
Oh my gosh.
He's played too many games. That's the problem.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's the problem. Yeah, I don't know. Just tell me.
Mason Appleton.
Interesting.
They're 7-9-3 with Mason Appleton in the lineup.
Wow, that's really interesting.
And they're 3-10-1 without him in the lineup.
Yeah, I mean,
maybe Mason Appleton is the key to this team.
Right. I mean, it makes sense to me. He's played really, really well. At least those last couple games he was.
Or
in
he
the lineup
caught the winning streaks at the right time, or whatever it is. I mean, that could explain a lot of this stuff. This is not a very fancy stats scientific way of looking at these things at all. So disclaimer there. It's just fun to look at.
Yeah, and that's why I think we're gonna update it sooner rather than later. We'll dig into some more stuff.
Some more indicative stats.
I think goal differential, maybe shooting, all that kind of stuff should be involved, and I think that's gonna help guys like Ryan Donato out a lot. I think that's where we'll see their true team value. But that is going to do it for this inaugural episode of the Deep Dive podcast. Thanks everybody for joining us for this one. Really looking forward to the new rebrand, hearing everybody's thoughts on it. I think it went really, really well. Harles is saying goodbye. Got any last minute, anything you need to say, RJ?
No, I think that's it. Yeah, I hope everyone likes the new name for the podcast. Let us know what you think.
Yeah, all right. Busy week for the Kraken up ahead here. A lot of games. Really excited about it. Quick reminder, obviously this is being released Monday morning. So tonight for everybody, Colorado game. If you're a Patreon subscriber, this is one of our 2 live commentary games this month. So make sure to look out for the link to that, and plenty of time for anybody, assuming you're listening to this before the Colorado game, to join the Patreon and join us for that. We had a lot of fun on the last one, and it should be a really, really good time. All right, so that's it. Thanks everybody, and we'll see you next time.